Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends everywhere. I'm very delighted to be here to share with you 3 stories and 3 lessons I learned from the stories. Stories that changed my paradigm about the transformation of my nation, Ethiopia. Some years ago, I understood a concept like I have never known it before. And this concept is a concept of hope. Before this understanding came to me, I was always wavering between optimism and pessimism, 2 isms. But at a later stage, I understood that hope is very different from optimism. The turning point was when I understood that the first letter in the concept of hope starts with H, which in my opinion is about hopping, jumping into action. Then I realized that some meaningful action is what we mean by hope. A good example which taught me this lesson was the patriarch Abraham and his wife, the matriarch Sarah, 2 old people who were promised a son against the natural law during their old age, but they hoped against hope. When Abraham was 100 years old, as good as dead, and when his wife's womb was also dead, they believed and they hoped. What do we mean by they hoped? They took action, a meaningful action. They interacted meaningfully and begot a son, Isaac. When I understood that concept of hope, it opened something more than positive thinking and optimism for me. And I realized that I need to hope against hope and act regardless of all my deficiencies and shortcomings. As stated earlier, I have been an accomplished environmental policy expert, climate change specialist, and I worked for local NGOs and international organizations, bilateral institutions, and also as a freelance consultant on these very subjects. However, I barely had any experience and knowledge in the concept of peace building, conflict management, etc. Of course, in my graduate studies at UMass Boston, I did some courses in conflict management, which gave me some ideas of what we mean by peace building and conflict management. But that was not enough. I started reading materials, and about 10 years ago, when the political tensions in my country were at their heights, I decided to come back home against all the odds. I brought my family, my wife and my 3 kids back to Ethiopia. And I started to jump the gun. While reading materials, I came across one common trait which worked in some countries like Northern Ireland, Colombia, South Africa, which helped leaders to transform their relationships and to transform their conflicts into peace and development. That common trait was the transformative scenario planning, a tool that was championed by Rio's partners and implemented in various other countries. So in these countries, this tool helped the leaders to cut corners by collectively and co-creatively imagine the futures of their respective countries. I was profoundly inspired by these poignant stories from the various countries I just mentioned, because the process was dealing not only with the political issues, but it was largely dealing with relationship issues. It was about transforming relationships of leaders. I also learned that discussing about the past is usually onerous, and conversing about the present could be very contentious. So one area of convergence for leaders could be discussing about the future. How can we co-build the future? So in 2018, I decided to set up an initiative, Destiny Ethiopia initiative. I left my job, I left my profession. I'm no more an environmental specialist and climate change expert now. So in 2018, I set up Destiny Ethiopia initiative, and I invited friends and friends of friends, and we decided to implement the transformative scenario planning exercise in Ethiopia against all the odds. And the whole idea was to invite 50 influential, insightful leaders from the entire social and political spectrum in the country, and kind of help them to co-imagine the future of Ethiopia. I'm talking about participants, which include politicians who were so polarized and never had the opportunity or never took the opportunity to interact and engage meaningfully with each other. A case in point is leaders of about 10 political parties who were in Eritrea and who later confessed that they never had any serious and meaningful interaction about the country and the people that they have been fighting for. So they said the transformative scenario planning exercise was the first exercise where they had a very meaningful interaction. The 18 months process of convening and eventually conducting the scenario planning process resulted in two products. One I would call a byproduct, and the other was the real product. The byproduct was the scenarios, which Atenesh mentioned, and the report, which by itself is unprecedented because such a diverse people and leaders coming together and having a collective co-created product is something that we have never heard of in Ethiopia, which by itself is quite amazing. But what is more amazing and more interesting to me is the improved relationships, improved mutual understanding, improved acquaintances, and mutual trust among participants, and a better capacity to work collaboratively together. That was the major product of the TSP exercise. Inspired by this exercise, after the scenarios were launched, Destiny Ethiopia and the Ministry of Peace, together, we invited a few other institutions, including the Ethiopian Political Parties Joint Council, a major actor here, to set up the multi-stakeholder initiative for national dialogue, MIND. That worked tirelessly for almost 18 months to launch a national dialogue process in Ethiopia. Then government decided to set up a commission, and that's how the National Dialogue Commission is now birthed, which is currently conducting the national dialogue process in Ethiopia. So as a result of this dialogue process, now we have the Ethiopian National Dialogue Commission instituting the dialogue process in Ethiopia. The second story I'm going to tell you is about a dialogue that we conducted among historians. The context. This is another very deeply polarized sector, because of which historians are reportedly persecuted, attacked, arrested, and sometimes marginalized as a result of their narratives. Besides, the Ethiopian History Common Course in colleges was discontinued for almost 2 decades due to conflicting narratives and disagreements on some texts on the textbook that remained unresolved for a couple of decades. We also learned that a notable earlier attempt by the government to resolve this predicament failed after 3 weeks of closed discussions among historians, and it just looks like a hopeless case. Then we took the courage to carefully design a process for 60 historians coming from all over the place, and the process allowed them for a facilitated conversation with ground rules, what we call unconventional kind of dialogue, exercises that promoted listening and empathy, some psychosocial support, among other tools. On the third day of the dialogue, a miracle started to happen. the team of historians agreed to set up an association of historians which has never existed before. And more interestingly, they reached a consensus on the texts that they failed to agree in the past. Later, they kept their word. The historians not only set up their professional association, but also took the case collectively to the Ministry of Education and saw to it that the course is reinstated. We now have an association of Ethiopian historians that is set to contribute to the nation-state building process in Ethiopia. And more interestingly, the history common course is back to colleges as a result of this dialogue. The third story I'm going to tell you about is a pre-election political party dialogue that we conducted in 2021. Context: the pre-election environment was tense and very stressful, which, according to many analysts, could have gone to the 2005 scenario, whereby we experienced an awful electoral violence, which most of you remember. All national and international analysis pointed to an almost inevitable electoral violence, and preparations were already underway to deal with these circumstances of electoral violence. Again, the MIND team came together and we decided to organize a pre-election political party dialogue, which was 4 closed sessions for political leaders. And the process identified major roadblocks that would impede a free, fair, and peaceful election. We also had an unprecedented pre-election dinner just 2 days before the election, which has never happened before. And during this event, we invited political party representatives from all parties. Around 135 political party leaders came together, and they shared meals, they hugged each other, they exchanged ideas, and they also exchanged good wishes in the form of a card that we prepared with each other. And as a result of this dialogue and these informal processes we conducted, the election, and of course, a number of other contributions from other actors, the election was concluded peacefully, thanks to the commitment and faithfulness of the leaders of the political parties. Again, we had a peaceful election against all the odds. 3 lessons from the 3 stories I just shared with you. First, regardless of what we are going through as a nation in Ethiopia, I realized that our leaders are not a different species. They are capable of transforming intergroup relationships and resolving conflicts in a non-violent way. I'm dead sure about that. And we can replicate the good successes that I talked about in Colombia, South Africa, Northern Ireland, Rwanda, etc. Second, sustainable peace is contingent primarily on honest conversations among our leaders, primarily. Peace deals would only endure if corroborated by dialogue. We don't need an external witness to explain the virtual cycles of violence that our adrenaline has brought us to so far. Enduring peace, in my opinion and experience, is only about enduring relationships. And third, optimism is not enough. Hope is more than optimism. Hope is about taking meaningful actions. Hope is about jumping the gun. In our case, the commitment of the organizing committees in the different organizations I just mentioned, and the different governmental institutions and non-state actors was incredible and invaluable. And as a result of that, we were able to achieve all the successes that I just mentioned. I'm very hopeful about my country. For this to happen, though, we need to address not only the political or instrumental causes of our conflicts, but also, and more importantly, the psychological and emotional barriers that we are currently facing. Dialogue, in my opinion, is an indispensable tool to address that. As several world changers stated, every change seems impossible at the beginning. And after it happens, it was inevitable. Finally, a quote from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. In 1999, he said, quote, "God does have a sense of humor. We South Africans were the unlikeliest, and that is precisely why God has chosen us. We were destined for perdition and were plucked out of total annihilation. We were a hopeless case. God intends that others might look at us as a possible beacon of hope and to say to the world, look at South Africa. They had a nightmare called apartheid. It has ended. Your nightmare will end too. There is hope for you too." My fellow Ethiopians and Africans, our nightmares will end too. Let's just continue hoping. Peace in Ethiopia and Africa is not only possible, but inevitable. Thank you very much.